a great concept. It's very unique. I mean, I haven't
Yeah.
been hearing about this.
I don't think there's anything else like it, which
No.
makes it great, but it also makes it hard to explain. So yeah.
Right. No, I get that. I mean, and I definitely have been, I feel like I'm like down the Meghan Dom rabbit hole right now because I've been like in all your different, wait, but let me introduce you.
Okay. Okay.
So here we are. So, hi, I'm Kim Drucker Stockwell with the Women's Survival Guide, and today we have Meghan Dom with us, who is author of 6 books, has written for The Atlantic, for Vogue, probably 30 other magazines I didn't catch there. She has a podcast, 2 podcasts, one called The Unspeakable and the other called A Place in Hell.
A Special Place in
A
Hell.
Special Place in
After the
Hell.
Madeleine Albright quote.
Which
right?
I love. And that is with a woman who's like a generation younger, Sarah Hayter. And they kind of court controversy and they talk about it. But today I did not bring her here to make everybody feel shitty about themselves that they haven't been doing anything with their lives.
They can do that on their own.
I can do that on their own.
I contract out for that.
No, yeah, you don't need me for that. No, I'm here to make you feel good about yourselves. And Meghan has yet another business called the Unspeakeasy, which is a community of women. And it is only women. And I'm going to ask Meghan to describe it from there.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me,
Pleasure.
Kim. I love talking about this stuff, and I'm excited that you have a community as well. So I think probably the easiest way to explain the Unspeakeasy is to just talk for a second about the origins of it. So I'm a writer. I've been a journalist and an essayist, and for 30 years I've written books, and I also teach writing a lot.
Yeah, that's right.
I've taught, at Columbia and on the graduate level and elsewhere. And I also teach private workshops, generally in personal essay and memoir. And I have a lot of women coming into the class, by no means only women, but it's a lot of women, and they come in. And I've been doing this for years. And it was around like 2019, right around there. I had published a book called The Problem with Everything, my journey through the new culture wars, which, took on a lot of these, polarizing issues and talked about generational divides within some of these topics. So anyway, but I was, my classes were not political or like dangerous in any way, but I was having a lot of women coming into the class, and it was like becoming clear that they didn't necessarily even want their pages workshopped. Like we'd be workshopping somebody's piece and they'd be like, oh yeah, whatever. I wrote this 10 years ago. I don't know. I just wanted to come to the class because I knew that this was a place where we could talk about these complicated issues, whether they had to do with gender or, DEI stuff or climate or guns or abortion, anything. The topics that I cover in my writing and then now on my podcast, they just wanted to be in a room where they knew that people were going to talk about this in a nuanced way. And I thought, wow, like, why are we even taking writing classes here? Like, why don't we just get together and talk about this stuff? And at the same time, there were a lot of podcast communities, places like Persuasion, the Fifth Column and Blocked and Reported. And then, I started my podcast in 2020. There's a lot of these sort of what we call heterodox, sort of free thought, kind of intellectual spaces, but they tended to be very male dominated. Like I would go to hangouts for some of these podcasters, for instance, and it would be like all dudes, and they'd be talking.
I saw one of your podcasts on the Unspeakable, right? That's the Unspeakable, the podcast, and that's on, by the way, on Substack. So I'll link into all that for everybody.
Yeah,
to all your different things. But I did see that, and it's such a different vibe, when you let the boys in the room.
Right. And I'm the last person to start any kind of women's community or anything like that. That's not my thing. But I was noticing that women were having a particular kind of experience to cancel culture and this kind of censorship culture. They were often afraid to speak up. not only because they feared professional consequences, which I think, a lot of people do, but they feared social exclusion.
Oh,
Women fight, not with their fists, but with reputational damage. And
mm.
so I was hearing a lot of stories of something blowing up in a book club, for instance,
Oh,
a Facebook group or an Amami group.
with the younger group, or just
All
in
kinds of women,
general, like across
all
the
kinds of
board?
women,
Yeah,
no
that
matter
makes
how
more
old,
sense. Yeah.
20s, 30s,
Yep.
40s, 50s, all the way
Yeah.
up, no matter what
Yep.
phase of life they were in.
Yeah.
Somebody didn't want to read Robin DiAngelo in their book club, and suddenly that person was tarred as a bigot. And even though most of the other women, agreed with our woman,
Oh,
they would go along with the one person who was being a bully. And so
oh,
I was noticing that a lot of the dynamics of the sort of mean girl in group, out group kind of middle school
oh,
landscape
God,
were
I thought we were
mapping
done with
themselves
that.
on. Yeah, they were mapping
No.
themselves on to these dynamics
Yeah.
with adult women in all kinds of ways. And the result was that women were not speaking up. They were just staying quiet about things that would have been non-controversial 10 years ago. Perfectly reasonable opinions had just been recoded as somehow right wing or bigoted or, any number of like, problematic boxes. And so I thought, oh my gosh, we need a place where women can come together and have honest conversations about these things. Not
Right.
necessarily that we all agree. It's not a political group, but it's, a place, sometimes I call it a women's shelter for the politically homeless.
I
Um,
think that makes, especially
and
these days, makes sense.
I started doing retreats, and we would go out to these beautiful places. They would bring about 15 women, and we would spend 2 or 3 days having some discussing things, curated discussions. We would bring in guest speakers, and we would talk about everything from, like I said, gender to censorship in the arts and public health and, trust and, just sort of institutions. And we've had fascinating conversations, and it has been extraordinary. I can't program these retreats fast enough. We have an online community now as well that's
Yeah.
private, membership based. Everything is
Right.
off the record, no social media, no Instagram posing, nothing like that. And it's been pretty life changing for people,
Mm.
and it's encouraging. It's
In
really,
what aspect has it been life-changing for people?
well, the idea is not that we just get together and complain about stuff, although we love to do that. But it really, people have said, oh my gosh, I came in and I was able to talk about these things, and I realized that I'm not crazy and that I'm not alone. The words that come up more than any other are the main word that people say is alone. I feel alone. I feel like I'm the only person who thinks these things. And in
Mhm.
fact, most people think these things, but we just need a space to talk about them in a respectful way. So the idea is to spend a few days having these conversations and also developing tools to then go back into your real life and be able to broach these subjects and say, hey, did you ever think about what this new gender movement says about gay people, for instance? Like, let's think about the ways in which we support transgender people, um,
Mhm.
and obviously want everybody to be exactly who they are in the world. But at the same time, there are aspects to this movement that are homophobic, that are misogynist. There's information that a lot of people don't have, and let's have a conversation about it rather than just getting hysterical and getting into a fight with somebody
Yeah.
or running away and crying as we
Yeah.
often want to do. Um,
How do
yeah,
you do that though? Because like in your retreats, it's a group of women. Like I looked at it, you can sign up. You kind of have to probably get approved so you don't have some
yeah,
like
yes,
guy or some like
you gotta go through me. Yes.
somebody. Right. And but like I think the questions somebody would ask was like, oh, is everybody like a liberal? Is everybody a centrist? I'm guessing they're not all right wing. So how do you, is it like a school where you can the way they do a class is they're like, okay, well, 10% has to be A type and B type and like
No, I don't have any
centrist and
quotas.
leftist.
Yeah, I mean, we have data from our online community. I think the majority of women have voted Democrat in the past, but have become disillusioned by the Democratic Party, or the kind
Hmm.
of extreme, a lot of this extreme progressivist. We would call them, sometimes we call them the regressive left. A
Yeah.
lot of those ideas have kind of infiltrated the Democratic Party. We definitely have Republicans, though. I mean, most people would consider themselves sort of center left, center right as well. But the thing is,
Hmm.
it's not. I mean, we have people who supported Bernie Sanders. I know we have a couple of Trump voters in the
That must
community.
be kind of fun because that is
Yeah,
a
but
whole
the thing
other
is,
ball of
like,
wax.
it doesn't, what the main thing that we keep talking about is that, like, these issues should not be politicized. Like, the
Right.
question of what is reality,
Right.
what is biological sex, that should not be a political issue. I mean,
Right.
even something like abortion, that only became politicized in the 1980s. I think a lot of people don't realize this. This was like
Yeah.
a medical issue up until the religious conservatives got a hold of it in the
Hmm.
80s. I mean, and I can tell you, we had a conversation about abortion one time at one of the retreats. There were 12 women with 12 different opinions about it. And we
Really?
talked for about 90 minutes, and people shared their personal stories. They shared what they knew about the facts. They shared what they knew about the medical establishment. They shared their religious beliefs. Some of them, if they were not religious, they talked about that. And it was like a beautiful thing to see, because they were very open to other people's ideas, and there was such
Hmm.
intellectual humility about the
Hmm.
topic.
That's a good word. Yeah.
And it was
Good combo.
really remarkable. And so that's the kind of thing we have again and again. I mean, we've talked about guns, we've talked about everything you can possibly think of. And it's just been extraordinary. And I don't think we ever talk about, like, who's running for office, or like who's voting for who, because this stuff
What's
really transcends that.
what's the most controversial that you've seen? What's that? What's like the as far as the subject goes that you've really had to like break it up?
Um, well, we haven't had any fist fights. It's been
Thank God.
challenging. I mean, after October 7th, it's been challenging with Israel,
Excuse me.
Palestine.
Yeah.
Uh, we had a retreat in the Poconos, gorgeous retreat at a beautiful place, just about a couple of weeks after October 7th.
Hmm.
There were definitely some people, there were a lot of raw nerves around that. And, um, we talked mostly just kind of about the media response, and how
Yeah.
to think about campus activism, and the surprise. I think a lot of people, especially on the left, were surprised about the sorts of politics that certain, especially people in certain generational cohorts held. So it was more like that. I mean, it wasn't easy. The gender thing comes up a lot. We do have a lot of women who've
Hmm.
they found their way to the Unspeakeasy because they're dealing with gender issues in their families or with their
Right.
kids. And also, like, that's the kind of thing where you get a lot of people who are on the left who never really thought much about it. They think that the gender movement is just like the new version of gay civil rights, and so
Right.
why wouldn't we support it?
Right.
And then when there's a reason to delve into it, they realize that their friend, their neighbor or their friend from book club sees things
Hmm.
differently, and things get really hard. So we have a lot of women come in that way. We've had a lot of women come in because of their opinions about school closures around COVID,
Oh, yeah. It's
that kind of
funny.
stuff.
That's
Yeah,
really percolated up again because of the Fauci stuff.
yeah.
Like people have, out of the blue, I'm noticing some real acid about that, and I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's very polarizing too. I mean, I think, there
Seems it.
are, yeah, and a lot of it depends on where you were living. I mean, if you were living in like San Francisco or New York City or something, and you had kids in school during that time, you had a really different experience than somebody living in Florida or Texas,
Oh my God. It's like,
people were, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's been, the aftermath of the 2016 election, and then of course the pandemic. I think it was really destabilizing for a lot of people who always just consider themselves on the left. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're
and
kind of like, what are you guys doing?
exactly,
I thought I was
right.
part of your
We didn't
group, but
mean
that's
that.
crazy.
Wait, we
I know.
didn't mean that's not what we meant.
That's
Right,
not what I meant. Back it up.
right.
What you had one in New York recently, right?
Yeah.
Did you have
So
because I was actually down there visiting my daughter when that was going on, and I was like, oh, that's close to me. Maybe I'll go, but then it didn't work out. But
yeah, so we have
um,
community retreats that are for online community members only. So that was
mhm,
one of our community retreats. So it was a little lower key, but yeah, we had fantastic time. Lisa Sellen Davis, who's written a lot
get that
about
down.
the gender stuff. She has a book called Tomboy. She has a new book coming
Oh
out
yeah.
about called Housewife, about the history of housewifery and its
Oh,
relationship to the women's movement. She's amazing. She came and spoke with us.
writing that down.
Yael
Yeah.
Bartour, who's Israeli living in the US, who actually she has many areas of expertise, not only Israel, which she spoke with us about, Israel, Gaza, but she also worked for the New York City Police Department as
Oh my
the
God.
social media person for a long time. So
Wow.
she can talk to us about the cops. So those were our guest speakers. But yeah, so that was a community retreat, and I think
Mhm.
we're doing 8 more this year. I mean, we're going
Yeah,
to,
I saw online. And do you go to all of those?
yeah, that's the idea.
That's the idea. I
I'm a
wasn't sure because I
facilitator.
noticed
Yes.
you have good collaboration. And I'm so jealous of your thing with I don't get jealous a bunch, but the process of putting together a podcast with someone a generation younger is so
Oh yeah.
cool. And I think so rewarding for both the people doing it and then the people that are listening. Because we cruise along just thinking, oh, this is what I think and this is my life experience from a generational standpoint.
Right.
But it's so not true the minute you step
Yeah.
outside of your generation. And
Yeah.
I read that article, it just came up, the New Yorker one by oh God, what's her name? Erin, I can look it up, but she's a millennial. Here it is. It's what's her name? It was about you. I didn't think it was a
About me. Oh
particularly.
no.
It was about you. It's the one, uh, Megan Dom to Millennials Get Off My Lawn by Emily
Oh yeah,
Witt.
that was a review of my book.
Yeah,
That's
I
an
I
unfavorable
actually,
review of my book, The Problem with Everything. Yeah.
yeah, I just thought it was like not, I, this
Well, it's
may
very
be part of the
funny because
problem. Like
yeah, I
you
mean,
don't get it.
yeah, I
Like,
mean,
kid.
I you write a book about the culture wars, and
Right.
the
And you got,
media, the mainstream media is not going to take kindly to it. It was very
right.
funny. I've written for all those. I mean, I've written for the
Yeah.
New Yorker, and um
Yeah.
yeah, I think that there was it's funny, that book came out at the end of 2019.
Hmm.
Um I don't know. I think people were still kind of, some of the issues that I was bringing up, I think some people were sort of new to them. Like it hadn't yet occurred to them that there was a different way to think about some of these things. So it was
Hmm.
sort of shocking. But
Oh.
yeah, the best headline was for what for there was a negative review of my book, and the headline was so fantastic. It was jagged little red pill,
Yeah,
because
what
I would talk about, well, because being
I
red
saw
pill,
that. Right.
like supposedly going over to the right, but like I would talk about Gen X and how much we loved Alanis Morissette, and so her
Right.
was jagged little pill. So jagged little red pill was so
Aren't
great.
they tricky?
It was worth it for the headline alone, I think.
You're like, see what you did there.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
um, I would think now, is there like a lot of laughter at your
yes.
yeah, because I
Yeah.
mean I do think, and then when people leave your unspeakable events, which I love, and we
Unspeakeasy.
can unspeak
Yeah.
easy. Oh wait, the unspeakable and the unspeakeasy.
The
And I
Unspeakable is the podcast, and it was also the
right,
name of one of my books. But yes,
and I do get a
everything is
little
under the Unspeakable umbrella, we can say.
umbrella. The unspeakeasy. Do you think people leave with kind of a list of, or like a mental list of things they're like want to talk to their friends about and try and,
Yeah.
like you said, sometimes you don't realize what your friends actually think unless you're sitting at the book club and somebody, it doesn't happen that often really. Um, people stay pretty mum because they really don't want to deal with the upheaval.
What's the point of having
I
friends if
know.
you're going to be like that? It's so
Yeah,
sad to me. Like,
right.
what's
I
the
just
point
think
of
it's
having
true.
a
I
book
think
club? Like,
right.
what's the point of going and spending time with your friends if you're not going to have an authentic exchange with them? I mean, it's like such a
Yeah,
waste of time, and it's so sad. Yeah, no, they definitely, I think they are then able to just, even if it's like a tiny little thing, like at
yeah.
work, if they're just able to say like, hey, I don't think I'm going to put my pronouns on my Zoom thing. Just
I do
whatever.
not.
I don't
I
think I
never
need to.
have.
Yeah,
And
and then
no one's
yeah,
given me any flack about it, but I just, I can't quite understand why that's anybody. Well, A, it's to me obvious, and B, it's none of anyone's business. Like
right.
it's sort of, it's like one's religion. Like,
Yeah.
why would I need to discuss that? Like it's none of your business. I think that's, um,
I think it just
there.
kind of like takes the heaviness off of it a little bit. Like I think people
Mhm.
are able to leave the retreat and be like, "Oh, like we just talked about all this stuff and we laughed and I actually can just say, hey, I don't actually agree with that," and then
Right,
move. I mean, the other amazing thing is that people then they make new friends and then they form their own communities. I mean, the online
right.
community, we have women all over the country, and in other parts of the world as well. I mean,
Yeah.
we have women in India and Australia and France, but they are forming their own little meetups in their local cities.
Okay.
Like, our group in Denver is very active, in Los Angeles,
Oh,
and so they then like have their Unspeakeasy, little local meetups that have
yeah.
popped up, and that's been really fun. And we also have book clubs within the Unspeakeasy online community, so you don't have to worry about your old book club.
That's good. Yeah, no,
I don't know.
I always say the wrong thing anyway. So I remember it's like, oh God, she shouldn't have said that. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
no,
oh,
yeah, you can't say the wrong
well,
thing. And our
mm,
authors come and visit. We also get authors. I get the authors often to come and
I
visit. We have
bet.
guest speakers within the online community who come in, and um, it's pretty great.
It sounds a bit like the Nantucket Project. It's and which started around the same time as yours. So it's not like it was one or then the other. I don't know if you're familiar with that one,
No,
but
what is that?
oh, it's a guy who I've known since I was like 18, but it turned out he became this big entrepreneur, Tom Scott, and he started the Nantucket Project with
Oh, the Nantucket Nectars guy.
yeah, yeah. And basically I went to it this year and I wrote about it. It was mind-blowing. It was like 3, 4 days of just, I mean, yes, Michelle Obama spoke. And by the way, she's just one would just wish she could run for president. I mean, she
Yeah,
could, but she won't, which makes a lot of sense.
she is.
But
Yes.
she's pretty remarkable. But aside from that, like left, right, center, all over the place. But it's the idea of pluralism, and it's so akin to what you're talking about in that there's sort of this the ability to we've lost our civility, like the
Yeah.
ability to listen, the ability to share without thinking you're going to get shouted down.
Yeah.
Both in in this case, it's more about the country and its politics and its
Right.
inability to come to a centrist position to allow, um, it's a wonderful concept. And I think that, like you were saying earlier, the noisiest is usually the smallest group.
Yes.
And this herein lies the problem.
Yeah.
Um, and how I guess maybe, I wonder, the press probably has something to do with giving them the platform that they convince all of
Well,
us that everybody thinks this way. I don't know.
yeah, I
But
mean, it's easier to sell polarization. right?
Yeah, it's a shame.
The mushy middle. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting too, because I mean, the women in our community, they range in age from their 20s all the way up to their 80s. I mean, we had a woman who was
Hmm.
80 years old, a retired physician who came to
Hmm.
our Seattle area retreat last year. They do all sorts of things. I mean, we have like, CEOs. We also have like women who are in the trades, electricians and
Yeah.
plumbers, stay-at-home moms and nurses,
Hmm.
teachers, and like small town librarians. And just, to have a room, to be sitting in a group of 15 women where like somebody is like, the head of a company and someone
Hmm.
else is like a small town veterinarian. It's
Yeah.
incredible. Like it's
Yeah.
just such a privilege, actually. We
Yeah.
had a woman, we did a retreat in Minneapolis, and that
Hmm.
city is just roiling after George Floyd. I mean, that is a very, very
Oh,
liberal
God.
city.
Yeah.
And just what's happened there is really complicated and devastating in a lot of ways. And we had a woman who had been a cop. She had been a police officer for 20 years
Hmm.
in that area. And she was a participant. She came to the retreat, and she spoke, for a couple of hours. She led it, she talked, and then we asked her all kinds of questions just about what it was like to be in law enforcement in
Hmm.
Minneapolis, Twin
Wow.
Cities
Yeah,
that
that would be
summer and
something.
after. And she explained things about what is involved in being in a police officer that people just don't realize,
Right.
and that's the kind of experience we have. Like the fact that our participants, they're not only attendees, but they
Hmm.
often contribute to the
Yeah.
discussion and bring their own experience to the rest of us. And it's so diverse. I
Yeah.
think that's like really part of the secret sauce.
Um, how, oh, I just realized, I think we're good for right now. We have 4 minutes left on this road. But how long do you think you can keep it going, or do you want to keep it going, or are you going to bring in other people to
Yeah.
help, to
Well,
spread?
I know. I mean, I'm a creative person. I am not a businesswoman. So
Yeah.
it's again, I never thought I would start a women's community, and I never thought I would
Hmm.
like be a business founder. But yeah, I'm looking for ways to scale. I mean, it's challenging because what's magical about it is that the retreats are small.
Right.
So, I wouldn't want to start having every retreat be 100 people or something like that. Like that would defeat the purpose. But we're going to grow in various ways. I actually am in the process of planning our first ever coed retreat.
Oh, oh.
Yeah, we're always going to offer the women. The women thing is,
Wow.
definitely like the bedrock of the
Yeah.
enterprise. But we're going to try to do, because so many men have wanted to get in on it. Like they're
Oh
so
my
mad that they're
God.
not invited. So I'm gonna put together in Chicago in June. I'll be experimenting with that.
That'll be, oh,
Yeah.
oh, I can't wait to read about that. That'll be interesting because it's
Well,
very
I don't know if you'll
different, I
read
would
about
think.
it, because we're all we're off the record. I don't let
Oh,
press
that's
in
true.
or anything like that. But yeah, it'll be interesting, and I'll bring in some guest speakers. I'm also going to be offering courses, writing, not only writing courses, but sort of other kinds of uh just kinds of courses and sort of intellectual discourse or debate or even philosophy taught by various kinds of interesting people under
Hmm.
the umbrella. So those will be co-ed courses. The Unspeakeasy school of thought. So
Oh,
we're
excellent.
building that out. And yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit. I can imagine this going in any number of directions, because there's so much interest.
Oh,
um
that's
it's
wonderful.
a matter of harnessing it and figuring out how
Well,
to.
we're running out of time on this one. I'd love to re-up on the other one, and this week I'll sign up for that other for Riverside. But I will definitely put online like the connections to both the community and all the blogs
Yeah.
and whatnot. Do you find because I don't want to say you're courting controversy, but do you get some difficult mail, some difficult emails or notes from people after you? I just would think you might.
um Well, not from the attendees. I mean, I've never,
No, I mean
yeah,
like from like all
oh,
the
in the
from
world.
the podcast
Yeah.
and I mean, I guess this just goes with the territory
You
maybe a
know,
bit.
I mean, what's funny is that, I mean, I've been writing about complicated stuff for more than 30 years. So I
Yeah.
started my career as a writer in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Um, and I would kind of, my thing always was that I would sort of like look at what was going on in the culture and kind of, think about, well, what are we missing about this? Or where are the places where there's hypocrisy? Or, I was
Mhm.
always interested in virtue signaling before we had a word for that.
Virtue signaling. Oh,
I
that's a
noticed
good
it
one.
everywhere, right? Like I remember, I've always
I'm
been
writing that
just
down.
very allergic to bullshit. Basically, it's
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
simple. And yeah, I mean, I would write about things, and before there was the internet, I would write stuff, and I would, there would be angry letters to the editor. I mean, there would be a lot of
Mhm.
people who appreciated what I was saying, but there would be the letters to the editor, and then
Yeah. The
then the
noisy
internet
ones.
came, yeah, and then the internet came around and there would be the comments
Hmm.
and it would be the mean comments and
Yeah.
I was an opinion columnist at the Los Angeles Times for about 12 years between 2005 and 2017 or so.
Wow.
And
It's a long time.
yeah, I mean, I've always, yeah, I used to print out my mean comments and like put them on the refrigerator. I mean, I've
Mm.
always gotten that kind of thing. But the interesting thing about it was that that was part of the job. Like,
Yeah.
if you were an opinion haver, like if you were a public thinker, your
Hmm.
job was to surprise people or make them think or like invite them to
Hmm.
think about something differently. And right around, around 2015, 2014, I started noticing that like that was the opposite of the job, that your job was to like tell your audience what they wanted to hear.
Right.
Kind of like, if you were in the mainstream media, there were these, you were sort of a good liberal in this
Yeah.
particular kind of way. And it was very
Mm.
uninteresting. And it was just like the absolute opposite of what we were doing before.
Right.
So this is such a cliche, but it's like, I didn't change, everyone else changed. So, but anyway, but to answer your question, I get less blowback now because
Hmm.
everything's so siloed. And this is not a
Huh.
good thing. Like everything is so siloed that like the
Right.
people who read me or listen to my podcast already want to hear what I have to say. So I actually don't
You're
get
like, no.
I don't get enough blowback. I mean,
Yeah.
there are definitely people out in the world who have written me off and decided that I am no longer like on the right side of history or whatever. But
Hmm.
it's absurd because
Yeah.
that's not true. So yeah, I mean, so it's a funny thing. I mean, the whole Substack ecosystem, you are preaching to your own choir,
It's true.
right?
Yeah.
So it can be very gratifying, but I think it can also make us a little lazy sometimes because
Do
we
you
just
think do you think that can change? Do you think the days of journalists being objective, I'll say pre-Fox, I'm sure people could argue that,
yeah,
the
turned into more
networks themselves were more liberal, but like Walter Cronkite, was he,
yeah.
I kind of considered centrist.
Yeah, there was a
You know,
single source of truth. I mean,
yeah.
it's not really, I mean, there's a political aspect, obviously, but it's more a legitimacy crisis. Because what
Mm,
we had back in the three network days, where there were three networks and whatever Walter Cronkite said was true. Now,
right.
being given information that was not necessarily entirely correct,
Hmm.
probably.
Yeah.
I mean, he was being, there were certain government mechanisms in place and corporate mechanisms in place and all kinds of things that were affecting what kind of news we were getting about
Yeah.
Vietnam or whatever it
Mm,
was.
yeah.
So I don't think we should romanticize that.
It's
Um,
true. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, certainly when 24-hour news came along and talk radio was that was a huge thing. I mean,
I remember I
they
remember
would say
that.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and what was also really interesting about conservative talk radio is that took off because people who were commuting long distances to
Hmm.
work, driving, were listening to
Right.
that. And so
Yeah.
you had more people in the exurbs, not
Hmm.
in cities.
Mhm.
listening to conservative talk radio. Anyway, this stuff's fascinating to me, but yeah, I mean, it's funny because there are like, people that, as far as I'm concerned, are stratospherically popular and have podcasts that tens of millions of people listen to a
Right.
day, that like my next door neighbor would have no idea who they are, you
Right.
know?
No, this has been, like I said, a rabbit hole because
Yeah.
through really digging into your stuff and then, looking at some of your guests or just like it's incredible. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do all day? I don't know who any of these people
Yeah,
are. And
don't
they're
yeah.
stratospheric. Like you're like, geez, like who but it is, I guess, because of the internet machine. And that's just people more our age. I'm not even looking at the other stuff, like
Yeah,
older and younger. And our group is tiny.
our
So
group is tiny. Well, yeah, I mean, our
I
cohort is
guess.
tiny. Our Gen
Yeah,
Xers are tiny.
right. I mean, it's a tiny for, just is what it is. And but it's a it just feels like that, and I know we've completely strayed off, but you're just a wealth of information, and it's like, what happens? Like, find a how do we ever create an American community again without like World War III? Like World War II was awesome for our country, bringing it back, unifying it on so many different levels, socially, economically, giving us the 50s. I don't think anybody wants a World War III. Plus, we don't have the draft anymore. Um, so
No,
so we only have people that want to get paid to go. They want all the goodies that come along with sacrificing themselves for our country, which is
right,
that's a
right.
very different way of thinking. Everybody in our government doesn't serve. So many of them don't serve anymore. It's the way we spend our money and the defense budget and on and on and on. You have someone like you have people that didn't serve in the military running our country
Right.
from our president on down. It seems like bad things will happen. Um,
It just seems
that's a
like
lot.
it just seems like everything is really broken. I mean, yeah, obviously we don't want World War III. We don't want, I mean, the 50s, it's funny, like people sort of fetishize the 1950s, like the nuclear
Yeah,
family, all that looked like. But I mean, what people realize, that was such a blip in time. It was such a
yeah,
blip in time. I mean, before World War II, I mean, everyone was just kind of working all the time, and
yeah.
you did not have a washing machine. I mean, doing the wash
Mm-mm.
like took all day, so it was a totally different thing.
Wash
Uh,
day.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to this. And my podcasts that I do, so just for the people, just so they know, like the Unspeakable is an interview podcast. That's the one I've been doing since
yeah,
2020 on my own. And then the other podcast is Special Place in Hell.
yeah.
I do with Sarah Haters. So a
Right.
special place in hell is what Madeleine Albright's famous quote was: "There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women."
Agreed. Yeah.
So we kind of talk about how, again, that's something that gets romanticized, like, oh, if only women ran the world, everything would be great. It's like,
No.
well,
Might be
um,
getting better, or it definitely gets better with age. I think. I mean, I have three girls who are in college right now, and it's like, no, you couldn't. I don't want to go back to that period of time. It's rough, and
yeah,
I think
especially now.
there's a great equalizer in age and experience for empathy,
Yes.
for reality. Um, but so maybe it's getting better. As far as I don't know, it's hard to say. I just would love for there to be a slowing down of jumping to conclusions about everybody and
Yeah.
everything, but it
I
doesn't seem
mean,
like.
I mean, you would know better than I. Like, if you have girls that age, everything is memes. Everything is just like, TikTok. I think the majority of people in their 20s get their news from TikTok, literally. Like,
I think so, actually.
and I mean, I don't know. I talk about this with Sarah all the time. She's 20 years younger than I am,
Yeah,
and she is much more pessimistic about the future than I am. Like, she really
that's
thinks
interesting.
the institutions are irrevocably broken. She
Oh,
thinks the universities are past the point of no return, that
ooh,
we're never going to get like free speech back in these, you know, institutions, and, you know, everything from museums to, you know, entertainment world to,
So interesting.
but the reason is because she hasn't known any different.
That's
You
true.
know, like, I mean, we remember growing up in a time where, like, if you were the director of an ideas festival, you were into interesting ideas. That's why you worked there. Like, that's why you had been given that job, is because you were going to program a range of speakers that had memorable and provocative things to say. And now, like I said before, that's the opposite of the job. You know, if you are running an ideas festival, it's about saying the right things and checking the right boxes
Huh.
and keeping yourself out of trouble and keeping yourself from getting canceled because you made the mistake of, you know, bringing on one wrong person. So, like, for
Huh.
Sarah, she doesn't know any different.
Mm,
So I think she's much less sanguine than I am. And so she would say I'm naive, that we're not going back to the way things were. And I
right.
would say this is unsustainable.
Right.
Nobody likes this. And you know, something's got to give. But I
Right.
don't know where the truth lies. I don't know what the answer is.
It is interesting. The whole that generation that basically was getting, well, a little younger than her, but was getting born or growing up post 9/11, which
Right.
is a very someone pointed out to me, just like think about that group, what they've experienced from a world terror standpoint. We did not, we had our own stuff, but
Yeah.
I mean, I not to like go totally off topic, but it's sort of like you look at the boomers who had um, presidents assassinated, and you know, you just kind of, and then all the other assassinations, RFK and King and Malcolm X and on and on and on, and you're kind of like that would have been pretty unsettling, as
Hmm.
lunatic as some of the stuff has been lately. I just held back on names right there. Um, you No one was assassinated, as prevalent as
Yeah.
guns are. I mean, by the
Right.
skin of everyone's teeth, I'm sure. But still, think of that. Like so many less guns in the 60s. And yet
Yeah.
that's to me, that, I mean, I'm sure a million people have studied it, but it's a change. Like,
I would be very curious. I've never thought about this. I would be very curious if a major political figure was assassinated, if the younger generation would be too rattled by that. Like, I wonder if they've
oh
become
yeah, no.
so
And we have the mass killings
like
now.
school. I
So.
mean, we have mass shootings. Like, we're so
Hmm.
sort of numb to that because of
Right.
the constant gun stuff. So, like, I wonder if, you know, if somebody was I don't know that it would have the impact of like JFK or Martin Luther King or something like that. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember when Reagan was shot. I mean, I was in
Yeah.
like, you know, fifth grade or
What were
something.
you in? Yeah. I mean, in DC, and no, that was, didn't they, that was pretty
It's a
remarkable.
huge deal.
Hmm.
Oh, totally.
John
Um,
Lennon was shot. I mean, there were
yes.
just some, it was definitely, it's different. I mean, it's very different. I can't speak to it because I haven't been, I mean, I knock on wood, I haven't been exposed to a mass shooting personally. It's just, I think what we all protect ourselves now because it's like, I can only listen to so much,
Right.
or like the news is so heavy all the time. And you know, there's that thing, the good news. It's
Oh,
like there's something
how
called
much do
that.
you have to pay for that subscription?
I think it's
Yeah.
free,
I mean,
but
we had a I mean, speaking of mass shootings, we had an attendee at an Unspeakeasy retreat, a
mm,
woman who had been in a mass shooting about 20 years earlier, and
oh,
injured pretty badly.
oh,
Um but nonetheless had pretty libertarian ideas about guns.
oh,
And so she gave a whole
mm,
talk about just sort of her thought process and, you know, what it was like to have been, you know, involved in this horrible tragedy that had happened. and just, being in the world, and I think she doesn't live out in the middle of nowhere. She doesn't live in a major city. She lives sort of like in a slightly rural environment. She has
Yeah.
guns, and she's surrounded by people with guns, and she's a
Hmm.
business owner, and I certainly didn't agree with all her viewpoints, nor did some other people, but it was
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. No,
That's the kind of thing we have.
I do think it's fascinating. I once was talking to some, up here in New Hampshire, like my husband's like, just FYI, everyone has a gun in their car. So
Exactly.
just
But not in
understand that.
Vermont. Why? How is that?
I don't know, and who knows. But
Right.
there are also a lot of automatic weapons hanging around. You just that's like snowmobiles. And I was talking to someone and I was like, why? Like, you don't need them for hunting. You don't
Yeah.
need them for anything. And the guy was like, why does a car go to 160 miles an hour? Like, why? And I was like, I don't know. It's stupid. But like, and he's like, because it's fun.
I've
He's
had
like,
this
because they're
argument so much.
fun. And I'm like, okay, but that's that may not be a good enough art. I mean, it's definitely not a good enough argument for me. Um, but it opens my eyes to see how you think.
Yeah.
And I think that's I I hate the argument, but I get it.
Yeah.
It's an argument. You can't, you know, I I'm not saying it's a good argument. It's just, but it is an argument, not the one I was thinking of when I said, why do you have one? Because in my mind, you have them for hunting or like target practice or like whatever. And they're like, no, have you ever shot one? They're so fun. I'm
Yeah,
like, oh,
that's what they all say.
I'm like,
Yeah.
no.
And also, like, I was very much like a city person. I was very myopic about
Same.
guns. I was very didactic about it, and like or dogmatic, whatever. And yeah, like somebody said, if you live out in the country, and there's somebody's on your property, you call 911 and they're going to get there in 45 minutes, maybe.
Right.
I'm
Right.
like, that's a real blind spot that I think people
Yeah.
have, real blind spot.
Yeah.
So
I think there's I think it really shouldn't be so hard to have, anyway, it's not for me to voice. That's not why I do what I do, which is funny. Like I do not use it as a platform for my own thoughts. It's more meant to be a motivational concept for everyone who's sort of like a woman wrote me whose career is winding down, and she's like, I don't have any hobbies. Can you write about that? And I was like,
mm,
yeah, we'll get a gun. No, I was kidding. But that's where I try and steer towards. It's almost like the opposite of what you're doing in a way. So that's why what you're doing, I can tell the ladies about and the gentlemen that are there too,
yeah,
and say like, okay, you need some. Here you go. Go over to the
some
Unspeakable
hobbies.
and the Unspeakeasy and
Yeah.
have at it.
We have a stitch and bitch in the Unspeakeasy online
Oh
community. They
yeah,
get together every week or so and knit and talk about what's in the news. So
that's fun. That's really cool. Yeah.
yeah,
Do you knit or do you needlepoint or?
I'm not in that group. Somebody else leads it.
Oh, that's cool.
The online community. Yeah. So but I love it. Yeah. I don't
That's
know if they all, maybe some of them like do embroidery or something. I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
love
great.
that. Well, any other thoughts for the
No,
fans?
I mean, I guess I would just say to people, if you feel like you're going crazy, you're not. Like everybody feels like they're going crazy, and that
Hmm.
alone suggests that they're not. I mean, there's so many more of us who are sort of, questioning all this dogma and the groupthink. There's so many more of us than there are of the group thinkers. I mean, I think it's crazy. Like a lot of these cancellation events that happen online, when you actually look down at the data and the algorithm, you can see that it's coming from just a small handful of accounts. It's
Yeah.
a very
I mean, I
it's
don't know that, but it makes
um
sense. I mean,
we're all the emperor has no clothes.
yeah.
And
Like the J.K. Rowling thing, that one makes me crazy.
yeah,
Like I can't. I just can't.
I mean, it's
I
not,
don't even
yeah,
know
I
what
mean,
to say.
I mean, it really, the grown-ups have to stand up. I mean, I
Right.
always say, like, if the smart, thoughtful people don't speak up, the stupid, thoughtless people are happy to do the job.
Right.
And
So
that's why
true.
it's so important.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes it's like the smart people are smart enough to know to keep their mouths shut. And
That's
that's
yeah.
why the room is dominated by these people with just half-baked opinions who just want to stir things up and who haven't
Hmm.
thought deeply and are not interested in thinking deeply. And so those of us who are interested in that, I think it's, it's incumbent upon us, if we possibly can, to speak up. And even if you can't speak up because you've got kids in school or you've got a job that you've got to protect, I mean, there are all kinds of legitimate reasons to not speak up, don't get me wrong,
Right.
but what you can do is find other people and
Yeah.
give yourself permission to
Hmm.
find people and come into a space where you can have these conversations and they can be safe and protected, and you can sort of come back into your authentic self.
Well, I can't wait to hear about the co-ed gathering.
Yeah,
I
we'll
am
see how that goes.
I'm guessing they will be, pretty thoughtful men as opposed to they'll most likely be outnumbered as well. So
This will be an experiment. So
it will be.
I'll get back to you on that. Okay.
Well, Megan, thank you so much. Again, it's Megan Dom. I will put all of your connections into the interview, and I really appreciate you coming and talking to the Women's Survival Guide.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm thrilled with what you're doing as well. So glad
Well,
we're all in